you know, a central bank digital currency that Elizabeth Warren went on Meet the Press. What she proposed, I'm 100% against, right? Because she proposed a Federal Reserve issued CBDC that really would replace cash. And that's why her bill bans Bitcoin and self-custody of Bitcoin and crypto, because it can't compete with the federal issued CBDC. Now that is, George Orwell spinning over in his grave. Her bill bans Bitcoin and self-custody of Bitcoin and crypto because it can't compete with the federal issued CBDC. Now that is, George Orwell spinning over in his grave, because programmable money, where the government can see everywhere you spend your money, how you spend your money, whether or not they can turn it on or off, limit it to geographical locations. When you take it to the extreme, and I'm not suggesting they would do this at first, but when you take it to the extreme, it could be, Darren, you donated to ABC Company, and we think that is a extremist organization. So now your CBDC doesn't work for that kind of donation, or limits you, like I said, geographically. So if there's a CBDC that's used, by the government to reduce friction, with the banking system or something like that, that's one thing. But a consumer issued CBDC by the Federal Reserve, no, that's a hill I'm willing to die on.
Duplication, we switched up the style here, but I mean, one of the things that, and Darren, maybe we go back and forth here, but experience fighting for the blockchain industry and like kind of taking your experience, like especially kind of in the XRP community, kind of taking that to into the Senate and kind of like disrupting the status quo, and maybe just what the process and the experience has kind of been like so far. I mean, because I'm sure it's been eye-opening kind of across the board for you.
No, listen, it's a great question, because there are a lot of parallels between what many of us in the XRP community, that's how people got to know me when we were fighting the SEC's overreach. Whenever disruptive technology happens, the famous saying, guys, they laugh at you at first, they dismiss you, then they get the regulators to sue you, and they fight you, and then they finally adopt you. And the people that are watching this, and you guys, we've all been part of the community that hasn't been fighting against regulation. We've been fighting for smart, tailored regulations. And so the first point, and going into the Senate, there's a lot of parallels, right? Because I would be considered a disruptor. I'm somebody who's not, just loyal to a party or a person or an agenda. Like Senator Warren, she's labeled to a certain agenda, the progressive agenda, the Democratic Party. She's not going to push the envelope and be the kind of disruptor that I am. And so whenever you're the disruptor, whether it's technology or as a candidate, people and the status quo are going to fight you, and they're going to be resistant. And so there are a lot of parallels. But part of my job, obviously, when I win, is to educate these legislators in the Senate of how this industry can actually foster and help things. You guys know this better than I do, because you're much more intelligent in the industry and knowledgeable. But stablecoin legislation, if it's done right, could actually bolster the US dollar and drive demand, and it wouldn't compete against the US dollar. And so the final thing I say to answer your question is, when Senator Warren introduced her bill that's a de facto ban on Bitcoin and self-custody of crypto in the United States, she had like 20 senators join her, some Republicans, Marshall from Kansas, Lindsey Graham. Now, they didn't understand that it was a ban, but that's a scary thought, that she could get 20% of the Senate just by titling the bill a certain way, and them just saying, oh yeah, I'll join with you on that. Now, they've all retracted, I believe, their support for that bill, but that's the challenge. So a lot of similarities.
Yeah, it is scary to know that, and that it's usually like the opposite, right? Like whatever the bill is, it's usually the opposite legislation. But I just wanted to know, like, what's your experience have been like since you had lobbyists or anybody from like the banking industry tried to persuade you to go away from crypto at this point?
No, I mean, I can tell you this, that the bankers, the JP Morgan Chases, the Jamie Dimons of the world, they want Senator Warren, right? Because I believe Senator Warren is the epitome of what happens in Washington, D.C. 12 years ago, she swore she was going to go to Washington and hold the bankers accountable. 12 years later, they write her bills, they finance her campaigns. And so I've had no contact from them, and I expect that they don't want me because, as you can imagine, I'm going to ask them different types of questions at a Senate banking hearing that Senator Warren's asking. I'm going to get to the point that, the banking industry is more culpable for illicit criminal activity than probably any other institution or entities out there.
John, I want to ask just briefly, I mean, especially now, again, kind of going back to like the experience, obviously fighting for like innovation and blockchain and through the XRP lens, but now, I'm sure you're interacting with a, bunch of different senators and stuff like that. What is the, I guess, pulse on digital assets now compared to, your experience a few years ago? Like, are people knowledgeable about the technology, what's going on in the space? Are they willing to support innovation, or do you feel like that there's kind of a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that maybe leads towards, fear of the technology, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's being embraced much more now. Unfortunately, it seems we're in an election year. So, unfortunately, and a lot has to do with my opponent, who my opponent is, it appears that, it's becoming a bit of a partisan issue, and technology and innovation should never be a partisan issue where Republicans are seeming to be more open to it and Democrats less, but still, with the Democrats, if you notice, it's a generational thing. The older Democrats seem to be, we don't understand it. We don't want to learn it. Why change? Why even deal with this? Whereas the younger Democrats seem to be embracing it more. So something that we've all known, like it's here to stay. It's just a matter of, is it going to be an easier transition the next few years, or is it going to be some more friction depending on the election results? Uh, I know that there's a lot of debate out there that Vice President Harris's campaign wanted to do a reset on crypto. And, I know Mark Cuban and others are doing their best to try to educate her campaign that this is something that they should embrace, and trying to educate them that Gary Gensler and Senator Warren has been part of the problem. And so we're making progress, bipartisan progress. But when it's in an election year, guys, it's hard to judge how sincere these politicians are, right? Like, are they just saying the things that the industry wants to hear for votes, or do they mean it? And that's all going to be determined after November 5th.
That was kind of where I was going with my questions. Is I noticed that many politicians are flip flopping, right? They're against crypto now, they're pro crypto, but also we have a lot of players entering the political realm, like Greg Kidd, that are part of crypto that are now running. And I just wanted to hear your opinion about other candidates that are coming into the political sphere, if that's going to be helpful in the long run, or.
Yeah, I think two things. One, it is good that you're getting more and more politicians that are open to it. The other thing is the industry is really having an impact, whether it's the political action committees, the PACs, or whether it's Coinbase's Stand with Crypto initiative, where, they're registering voters in the swing states and supporting pro-crypto candidates. There's no doubt, and I heard that crypto or crypto related funding is the number one, campaign contributions this election cycle. So that's a big statement. And I can tell you that younger Democrats are joining me, not just because of crypto, when they realize that I'm a socially moderate guy and that I'm more of a centrist, I'm not an extreme person, then I have a ton of Democrats that are supporting me. And a lot of it has to do with the technology.
I think this is maybe just in the past week. We've seen kind of a changing of narratives, I guess, from the SEC as far as like documentation that they put out deeming certain like terminology around like crypto securities, and then just as a very broad statement, and then like kind of backtracking on it. I would love your take on that, I guess, is part one of that question. And part two is like, where is the accountability in all of this? Because at the end of the day, there's like, we want to support innovative culture in the United States and all these startups. And a lot of that verbiage has probably like ruined business models in the US and all this other stuff. So like, where's the accountability at? And what's your take on the changing of the narrative?
Well, listen, it's kind of frustrating. Like on one side, you're relieved to see them, come around. On the other side, it's very frustrating. Guys, you know this, when I took on the SEC on behalf of XRP holders, what I said from the very first writ of mandamus was just say that XRP itself isn't a security. All right. That's all you got to do, which is follow the law of 75 years. And we don't even have to be involved in this litigation. And the SEC refused to stipulate to that. In fact, they said that XRP embodied the security, therefore it is the security, all that nonsense. Ripple spent $100 million in fees. XRP holders, we lost $15 billion in market cap when the lawsuit was announced. So there's been a lot of damage. And that's why I put a post out there that on behalf of the XRP holders, we don't accept Gensler's apology or whatever the apology was in that brief that they filed. And accountability is that's a hard one for me to answer, because obviously I want accountability. I know there's an IG inspection report on the conflicts that's in the final stages. We'll see what what they say, because clearly there were conflicts of interest at the SEC, regulatory capture and all that. That'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to that. And but at the end of the day, there is a chance that it's sorry that we cost you guys so much heartache, so much money, so much pain, but now we get it right now. That may end up being the only accountability, but I'm hoping if I get to the Senate, I can assure you I'm going to do everything I can to hold these people accountable for what they're doing or what they've done.
I see a lot of politicians are taking the stance of anti-CBDC, where they don't want to have the CBDC at all. I think it's more of like a nuanced question of privacy versus just the CBDC. And I'm curious to hear your take on CBDC and your stance towards it.
Well, it depends on, obviously Ripple's a company that's been working with sovereign nations, talking about some type of central bank digital currency. A central bank digital currency that Elizabeth Warren went on Meet the Press, what she proposed, I'm 100% against, right? Because she proposed a Federal Reserve issued CBDC that really would replace cash. And that's why her bill bans Bitcoin and self-custody of Bitcoin and crypto, because it can't compete with the federal issued CBDC. Now that is, George Orwell spinning over in his grave, because programmable money, where the government can see everywhere you spend your money, how you spend your money, whether or not they can turn it on or off, limit it to geographical locations. When you take it to the extreme, and I'm not suggesting they would do this at first, but when you take it to the extreme, it could be, Darren, you donated to ABC company, and we think that is a extremist organization. So now your CBDC doesn't work for that kind of donation, or limits you, like I said, geographically. So if there's a CBDC that's used by the government to reduce friction, with the banking system or something like that, that's one thing. But a consumer issued CBDC by the Federal Reserve, no, that's a hill I'm willing to die on to oppose.
Yeah, it almost, I mean, one of the things that I think that when you hear like people that are really building in this space, companies that are really trying to innovate and stay in the United States, it seems like all they're asking for is like some sort of a framework so that they can actually innovate. Like I remember we've done a bunch of interviews talking about kind of the Clinton administration when the internet started kind of coming to fruition, and they had a very kind of hands-off approach to saying, hey, let the internet do, let this technology kind of flourish. Obviously with crypto, you're inviting in a level of financial aspects into stuff. So, I would imagine that there's got to be some sort of like safeguards in place. But it seems to me like a lot of these companies that are trying to do things the right way, the biggest pain point is they just don't know what's right or wrong. I guess the question I have there is like, how much do you feel like could be kind of encouraged at the state level to support innovation versus what are the things that kind of need to happen at the national level? Yeah.
Well, no, listen, you're right. I can tell you, I've been in meetings, I know you guys have as well, of entrepreneurs where they just, in the last 5 years, where they simply say, you know what, we'll just exclude the U.S. market. We're going to exclude offering anything to U.S. customers. And we're not even going to go with accredited, like investors either, because we can't afford to put $5 million to the side to litigate the SEC if they come after us or if they issue a Wells notice. And so that's first and foremost. And it's because of the lack of clarity, in my opinion, that FTX and other things happened. And at the end of the day, entrepreneurs just want some kind of guidance and certainty, and then they will meet it. For example, we could say, listen, here are some decentralized markers, right? Just for lack of better phrase. If you meet these markers, and we could limit the one entity can't hold more than 35%. I'm just making up numbers of like the outstanding tokens, or you have to have these many validating nodes, or whatever those markers are. We could debate them, but we say, if you meet these criteria, it is a commodity and it will be governed by the CFTC. If you fail to meet these markers, then it's going to be a securitized asset. It's going to be governed by the SEC. We could debate what the markers should or shouldn't be, but if we do come up with them, entrepreneurs will reach them. Unfortunately, the SEC doesn't like that. They want it to be vague. They want it to be opaque. So that gives them maximum prosecutorial options. And that's something that's got to stop.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I wrote on Twitter that I donated to your campaign, and people were saying, oh, I don't live in Massachusetts, I can't. So I just want to put out there that I don't live in Massachusetts. I donated to John's campaign, and John has a very hard time kind of promoting the idea of donating towards his campaign. So I want to say it, JohnDeatonForSenate.com. It's where you can donate. And I just would love to see Warren out of the picture and John in the picture, because I think he adds a lot. And I'm curious to hear some of your other policies that are outside of the blockchain space. If you could kind of just give a couple of them.
Yeah, I believe in term limits. I believe that a senator should get 12 years, a congressman 12 years. So it would be 6 2-year terms for congressmen, 2 U.S. Senate terms. If you can't bring change in more than a decade, then it's time for you to step aside and let someone else have a fair opportunity. So term limits. I also support shutting the revolving door. You shouldn't be allowed to be chairman of the FDA on Friday and on the board of Pfizer on Monday. You shouldn't be allowed to be the SEC chairman on Friday, and on Monday you're Apollo Group's advisor, senior advisor, and you're now a blockchain advisor for all these companies just within a few weeks of leaving. So there should be a 3 to 5 year statutory gap from being a regulator and then going into accept a job in that industry. We really need to clean it up. I support single bill issues. The Ukraine funding bill, guys, you know what it should be called? the Ukraine funding bill. It shouldn't be called, oh, we're going to call it infrastructure, and then we're going to have like roads and highways and bridges, and oh, here's some money for Haiti, and here's some money for Iraq or Iran or whoever. Single issue bills should stand on their own, and if they can't pass, then they shouldn't pass, maybe. And obviously, I do not support any law that is going to expand the deficit. I was really surprised that the presidential debate, there wasn't one question on our debt and how we're going to get out of this debt crisis. You know, what people need to understand is if we cut every dollar in discretionary spending and only spent money for mandatory, which is, you know, Social Security, Medicare, defense, and our interest payments, we're still at a deficit. You know, so you can't cut your way out of it. You can't tax your way out of it. You have to have pro-growth innovation. In Massachusetts, when you have a pro-growth, pro-innovation kind of regulatory environment, my state, Massachusetts, is going to do well, right? We lead in innovation. We have MIT, we have Harvard, and many other storied institutions. And so everyone asks me, am I a pro-crypto candidate? And I always say I'm the pro-freedom candidate. I don't think the government should tell you what you can own and what you can't own, although I do believe in protecting consumers from fraud.
One thing that's interesting is Darren and I were doing this was probably like a year and a half ago. We used to do these podcasts together, and we were like in real time looking at documentation. It was like budget aspects within the House Budgetary Committee, and it was the House Budgetary Committee's response. And the House Budgetary Committee's response to the budget was having a ceiling in place for the budget does not allow us to manage fiscal decisions appropriately. And I've like had to reread that like 3 times. I'm like, you literally have like the House Budgetary Committee saying that their budget is not making them, you know, is not enabling them to manage the budget appropriately. And I'm just like, this is like wild that we're at this point with like the way that, you know, this nation is kind of handling its finances, and it just keeps expanding. It's like something's got to give at some point.
Listen, we're paying $3 billion a day in interest alone. Interest payments exceed national defense. It's just unsustainable. Credit card debts at 1.14, student loan debts at 1.7 trillion, the national debt's at 35.5 trillion. It's unsustainable, but these elected leaders in Washington, they ignore it. There's no fiscal responsibility whatsoever. And so my position in the Senate would be, if it increases the deficit, maybe okay, as long as there's some pro-growth, you know, long-term plans that are going to grow the, you know, jobs and expand the economy. I mean, we have 2/3 of our economy is on consumer spending. So we got to put money in the consumer's hands, since 2/3 is consumer spending. And so we've got to come up with, you know, real fostering innovation, energy. I mean, there's so many ways to foster energy and renewable energy and all of those things, but there's so many regulations that choke it off. And so I'm someone who obviously believes in protecting the consumer, but we need to lessen the burden on American entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I read that like the majority of jobs are coming out of the government at this point. Like the private sector is not really creating jobs like they used to, and more so the government's creating more jobs, and it's just you know, we're kind of like in this downward spiral, like you're saying, and we need ways to get away from the debt and
well, I think it's 25% growth in the federal government and government jobs where the others are laying off. Listen, and Elizabeth Warren, you know, her approach is, well, we need those 85,000 IRS agents because of billionaires. Well, my response to her is there's 759 billionaires living in America. So I could see 759 IRS agents, right? One assigned to each billionaire. The other 84,300 are coming for you and coming for me, and small businesses. And so that's just one example of what you're saying, Darren, about, you know, the government is the pro-growth business, and that is is a recipe for disaster.
I think it's one of the things too, where like, we always hear about, from being in the blockchain space, how innovation is moving out of the country. You've got Mika in Europe, and we hear like Singapore and Japan are pretty welcoming, Dubai, Bahrain, like nations like this, like, but we don't always hear, and I think I would love maybe your take on that just a little bit, but I don't think that we always hear about like the actual like real world businesses that already exist out there and the ways that they can streamline their operations using blockchain, which 100% is going to happen. As this technology gets adopted, you're going to have mom and pop shops that are probably using blockchain without even knowing that they're using blockchain. And it's like, how do we get from the businesses building in blockchain moving out of the country to the mom and pop shops like using the technology? Because we never hear their stories, and they're going to be, we talk about mass adoption, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be using the technology more than anybody.
But it's electing leaders that understand the technology. I mean, guys, I'm sure you saw Senator Dianne Feinstein was like 90 years old, being wheeled on a wheelchair weeks before her death, and people were whispering how to vote in her ear. We have Bernie Sanders just, is running again, and he's in his 80s. He'll be almost 90 next time. If I don't win this election, I'm sure 6 years from now, Elizabeth Warren will run for a fourth term. And these people that don't understand the technology, because they're so rooted, not just by age, by this system, and they're so resistant to change, they're voting on artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, robotics, automation. So we just got to elect leaders that understand that we're moving away. And these mom and pops you're talking about, they're never going to adopt when they're scared that they're going to get sued. They just don't have the money. I can't tell you how many times people have said, I'm just going to exclude the United States because we can't afford to put several $1 million aside in case we get sued. And so that's going to push. So we, hopefully whoever wins the presidency, they're both talking about being receptive to this technology and this industry, and hopefully that plays out. Because we can't afford another 4 or 5 years of regulation by enforcement, and all the things that we've been experiencing, or America will, in fact, lose the race in this fourth industrial revolution, so to speak.
Well, I know Darren and I know that, I would suggest anybody just go Google search how many patents China has on blockchain. And it is in the thousands and thousands and thousands of patents. And it's just, at some point, something's got to give. Darren, go ahead. I know we're ramping down here with you, John, and we really appreciate your time because we know how busy you are.
Yeah, I just wanted to see if there's any last things that you wanted to mention, or where can we, John Deaton for Senate is where we would go to donate. Where else?
I appreciate it. And listen, if you live in Mass or, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, if you can't afford to help donate, we have a volunteer sign up. It's more than doubled since I won the primary, and so that's fantastic news. But JohnDeatonForSenate.com. You can't be a foreign resident, but you could be a resident as long as you're a U.S. citizen, but I can't accept donations from foreign folks. But if you live in the United States, this is a federal office, has national implications, obviously. So if you live outside of Massachusetts and it can afford $5, it does help. Listen, change is difficult. I knew this race would be difficult, but I wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't winnable. I just wouldn't waste my time, my money, spending time away from my 5-year-old daughter. I wouldn't do that if I had no chance to win. There's a chance to win. I tell everyone, and I think I'm on that victory path. October, I wanted Senator Warren to agree to 3 debates. She only agreed to 2, even though she got 4 when she was the challenger. The first one will be October 15th. People can tune in. And I think after that, people are going to see that I have a shot at winning this race. Not that it's not a lost cause. And I look forward to proving it. And when I win, I'll be back on your show and other shows because I'm never going to forget the people who wanted to hear what I had to say before becoming a U.S. Senator.